Teamwork. There's no I in team.
So true. Points.
Looks like you're ready.
Let's give this a power. The real mechanisms were the friends we made along the way.
So, what
There's no I.
Looks like you're ready.
Let's give this a That's creepy.
That's really bad. It really shouldn't be doing that. It really shouldn't be doing that.
You can just turn the sound on, right?
That's what I, yeah, thanks.
Victorian.
Thank you, son. Yeah, that was actually going to be the first thing I tried. But thank you.
That was
Okay, you know this already, but speaking times are from 7 to 8 minutes, with POIs between the first and 7. At 1 minute, you will hear this bell to indicate the start of POIs, and you will hear the same thing at 7 and twice at 8. At 8:15, I will clap 3 times and then continue clapping until you sit down. Reply speeches are 4 minutes long. We'll hear a bell at 3 minutes and a bell and 2 bells at 4 minutes. So with that, I welcome the first opponent to begin the stage.
How do you would like it formulated?
They say that you can't beat Wellington on a good day. Unfortunately for gold, it is raining outside. 3 things in the speech. Firstly, on setup/framing. Secondly, on emotional impact. And thirdly, on tangible impacts. Okay, on setup and framing. 2 things here. Firstly, we tell you that a very large amount of relationships will end for a person. It's very unlikely that a person is going to have a decent chunk of relationships that last throughout their whole life. It is basically impossible, and even if it is, only maybe 1 or 2 people in a country would have that, right? And secondly, we tell you that most relationships last 1, 5, 10 years maximum, right? So therefore, we tell you that most of your life occurs outside of the relationships. Outside of these relationships, right? So what are the impacts of this phrase? Firstly, we tell you that everyone is likely to feel the effects of relationships ending. And secondly, most of the debate takes place outside of certain relationships because people constantly have a stream of relationships coming and going, right? So therefore, most of everyone in this debate is going to be under the effects of this. And therefore, the scale of our case is going to be absolutely massive because everyone is likely to be affected by this to some degree, right? So how does the end of a relationship have huge emotional impact? Why is there this huge emotional impact? 3 reasons here. Firstly, humans are very retrospective, right? We often miss things in the moment and dwell on them afterwards. This is because we've had more time to think about things. We've had more time to form opinions of them. We've had more time to go down mind rabbit holes and overthink things, right? So intuitively here, it makes you view your view of a relationship after matter more than what it was in the moment because you often kind of forgot what was happening in the moment. You often glanced over it, right? So what's the impact of this? Well, we tell you that any emotions kind of felt afterwards, after the ending of a relationship, good or bad, are likely to be substantially amplified by this kind of retrospective overthinking mentality, right? Okay, secondly, if something ends badly, humans are often very, very emotionally charged in the moment and rapidly change their views and let this bad ending plague their views on the rest of the good stuff in the relationship, right? And they often let it spill into all of the good in the relationship. Intuitively, that means that how the relationship ends must matter way more than how what happened within the relationship, because if it ends badly, all of that good could completely go to waste due to going down a rabbit hole, right? So yeah, so therefore okay. So the third reason is that the ending of a large relationship is likely to have very, very significant harms on you or benefits on you if it ended good, right? So because it was big, right? Obviously, you're going to mourn a very a long relationship, a long-term girlfriend or something. So that harms or the benefits are likely to be very, very big, right? Okay, 2 outcomes here. Firstly, if you're sad, then like that the relationship ended and it comes with negative feelings for you, you're likely to be very, very sad. It's likely to be amplified tenfold for you. This could be very, very like atrocious, like at a point where it could be like a tipping point for someone who's vulnerable or depressed for them to actually like go and commit self-harm or something. It could be very, very detrimental because of how big it is, right? And secondly, like if you are made happy from a relationship ending, you're likely to be very happy, right? The things that you you're likely to be very happy. So weighing here, 3 things. Firstly, we tell you from setup that most of your life is going to be like affected by these emotional impacts because you constantly have a stream of relationships like coming and going, right? So therefore, if you have these positive or negative feelings, they're likely to be occurring like all throughout your life, right? Secondly, we tell you they're likely to be large because of a couple of the mix that I gave you throughout the point. And secondly, we tell you that it's certain to happen because every single person will have relationships that come and go, right? So therefore, at the end of this point, we should care so much about the ending because A, it's felt in the rest of your life, and B, it completely trumps all of the good feelings you might have had during the relationship. Right? Okay, yeah, I'll take that point now.
Okay, so your relationship ends, as most of them do. Why are you likely to dwell on that in 10 years when you've met so many new people, made so many new memories, and your life is completely different?
Well, we tell you that, like, throughout that 10 years, when you've met more people, more relationships are going to end, right? You're going to have a constant stream of them coming and going, and therefore the impacts are likely to be felt all throughout your life, right? Okay, our second main substantive point on tangibility. Some framing here. Firstly, we tell you that relationships are a really, really large part of your life, and you're likely to put a lot of, like effort into them tangibly. You're likely to put like money, you're likely to put property, you're likely to put time, invest a lot of things into them, right? And as per our setup, the majority of tangible effects happen, tangible effects after a relationship ends happen like in your life and in the majority of your life, right? Okay, 4 mix here. Firstly, like if a relationship ends badly, you may like tarnish connections and things like that, right? Like you might like tarnish connections to others. And this could be like, for example, like you could like your friends of a partner, you could alienate them, you could alienate some potential mutual friends, you could like alienate work colleagues, which could have like drastically negative impacts in your life because you could go on and you could miss out on great opportunities that you really, really strive for, and you could like miss out on all of that, right? And you can miss out on potential friends and things like that, right? Secondly, like if you're living with someone and it ends really badly, then it's likely to be very, very messy or costly finding like another place to live, right? Which is going to be very detrimental for you because obviously housing and stuff is quite expensive these days, right? Thirdly, if you have like kids with this person, then it becomes legal. So not only this like tangibly affects you because you're not able to spend as much time with your kids and stuff, it also tangibly affects the kids really, really negatively because it like impacts their whole life through to their schooling, through to them being like potentially sad and all that kind of stuff, right? And fourthly, like if you have things like shared belongings, the ending may like determine what you get to like tangibly keep between you, right? So the outcomes here. Firstly, there's things like your career may be affected, and secondly, there's things like you may lose your relationship with your kids, or your kids may be like significantly harmed, right? And this is so exceptionally bad because things like career and connections and like the ability to make future friends is something that is so exceptionally important to a person as it shapes them as a person, and it shapes like the direction in their life, and it shapes like all of the good things they're likely to have in their life, right? Before I move on to weighing, I'll take a second point.
If most of your relationships are friends who you meet in your life and eventually move on to, wouldn't this proportion of bad ending relationships be incredibly small and so not most?
Well, I think the thing is like, even if like you're likely to, I think most people are likely to at least at some point in their life have one relationship, even if it's just one, that like massively, massively affects them, right? Even if on the smaller scale it is just one, right? And that like thing that is the relationship that's likely to massively affect you does have these humongous harms that I've stepped through all throughout this debate. Okay, for the weighing for tangibility, well, we tell you that like the amount of mix and the amount of examples that we've given you means that neg has a lot of work to do to actually be able to take out any of these tangible outcomes. And secondly, because they're like, these are both large scale, like physically and time wise, they begin to stack up as more relationships end. And like these like seemingly small scale things could end up really, 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 really bad throughout your life, and therefore they matter in the debate quite a lot, right? Okay, so why should you care about how they end? At the end of this debate, I think at the end of the speech, we very, very much like concretely proved to you that like you get like many like very, very amplified emotional impacts, and there's lots of tangible impacts that come from this, and they're so exceptionally significant because of the fact that they span all the way across your life. They're certain to happen, and they are really, really, really bad things for your development and you as a person. Thank you.
Awesome, and whenever the first negative speaker is ready,
We think in a relationship of 5 years, when every single week you go on a date night with one person, when you get to the point where you move in with one person, we think the cumulative benefits of having a true, deep connection with someone is so much greater than any benefit or any negative they could possibly get from just a bad breakup. The time scale here cumulatively adds up. That is what you should care about in this debate. We'll explain to you why that is the case. 4 things for me to do for you in this speech today. 1, a point about setup, then onto some rebuttal, and then onto my 2 substantive points. 1, about the deep emotional impact and how we are far better off and why we should matter, or why we should care about the emotional impact far more. And then secondly, about like skills that we also develop as well, and like some tangibility that we take away from the relationships when we're within them. So onto some setup. What do we believe is meant by matters in this debate? What are we actually considering here? Firstly, we're talking about like the mental calculus in our head after a relationship, about how the relationship has had the greatest impact on you when you're looking back on the relationship, but also when you're in this relationship as well. And also, what do we mean by how long it's lasted? We believe like we're weighing up like the quantity and like how you felt when you're in this relationship as well. The day-to-day actions, those like text messages that you've had as well, like the bed and breakfast that your partner's made for you in the morning every single day. And then also we believe it's very important to note that the relationship is the same in both worlds. What changes in this debate is how we view the debate, or like the value where we put the value in this debate. Do we put the value on the end of the relationship, or do we put the value on the relationship itself? On to some very quick rebuttal. I think we get this idea firstly from the Affirm team, which is like the assertion that you spend a lot of time outside of most people spend time outside of your relationships. Why do we believe that's not the case? Firstly, we believe you are always most likely going to be having family and friends in this relationship. We believe like those personal relationships build up quite a lot. Why is this? We believe like empirically that like it's in our biological code, like survival of the kindest is one of the ways in which you survived when humans were first evolving. You needed to have friends, otherwise you'd get kicked out of the tribe, otherwise you'd die because you couldn't survive your own. It's a biological thing in our mind. You try and want to make friends all the time. We have the chances that there was no one in the world, no one in a university campus, no one in your school, no one at work that you can like relate to or that you can connect to is quite rare. We believe it's like quite unlikely that you're not going to be in relationships a lot of the time. So that means you are going to be getting the benefits when you're in those relationships quite often. A lot of my very quickly on this idea about like the tangibility and like if you've got kids, we believe if you're at the stage in which you've moved in with someone, when you've got kids with someone, we also believe simultaneously the bar for that relationship to fail disastrously, for the point where all of that falls apart, when you're at the point of a relationship when you've married someone and when you've like decided to have kids with someone, you're probably really well like established in your relationship. So we believe there's a far higher bar that relationship ultimately breaks down. And I'll also integrate my rebuttal about like how we about the emotional impacts about this as well. Yeah, I'll take that one.
Don't you agree that even on like the smaller scale in relationships, you're likely to put like money, time, and effort into them? And don't you think that this is a massive tangible negative for you as a person?
No, because we believe that the effort that you put into it is going to like be reciprocal, and the benefit you're going to get from putting that effort and that money in and the time with those people is going to be so much greater. I'll explain that now. Explain this now, and this is my first substantive contribution about like the emotional impact that we get in this debate. I'll prove to you that like the impact and the value that we get when the relationship is ongoing, when the relationship is happening, is like accumulates over time far more that outweighs the end of the relationship. Hence, you should like care about and value this more as a person. Why Why is this important? Because again, we believe like the scale of a relationship that happens far longer. We believe like 5 years is a whole lot longer than 1 week. So why do we believe the emotional impact is far more significant? As I've kind of alluded to you all the way down throughout my speech, is firstly, due to the time. Why is this? The time is far longer, so you should care about this more. A, because you spend a whole lot more time with people. In order to maintain a relationship, you must have a whole lot more conversations with someone. You must put effort into a relationship to maintain that. What that means is eventually you stop running out of things to say about the weather. So eventually you turn on to start talking about far more deeper issues. When you grow connection with someone, when you get to know their humor, when you start to feel safer with someone, you're far more likely to be vulnerable with that person and get to deeper issues like contemplating the universe or like being more open with that person. B, we also believe that like it becomes part of your routine. We believe that it becomes habituated. As I told you, we believe often like things like going out with your mates every weekend, it becomes a part of a routine when you like go into town with them, or like you go to a debate, for example. That becomes part of your routine in which you're making friends. That becomes something that you rely on for your emotional connection. We also again, every morning you get a text message when you wake up, how did you sleep? And then C, we just believe like intuitively it is a bigger proportion of your life, so you should care about that more. 5 years is longer than 1 week, although I'm not too, 5 weeks is longer than 1 week. Secondly, on the point about vulnerability, we believe that, again, during these relationships, you're far more likely to share your deep concerns, you're far more likely to share your vulnerability, to open a unique part to yourself that is exclusive to this person. In doing that, you get a whole lot more benefit when you get something off your shoulder, you get something like off the weight of your mind that you wouldn't be able to normally do. We believe the benefit you get from that. We believe that comparatively, you aren't as vulnerable, or like these vulnerable things aren't brought up when a relationship ends. Why is this? Because we believe like you're not often given a real reason why a relationship ends. Okay, why is this now? Because either like you like the person and you want it to like end amicably, or like you wanted to end amicably, I'll get onto this a bit later as well, or you want like power in this relationship, you don't want the person, and you don't want to seem like a person that's like really vulnerable, so you give like a fake excuse, like you don't like their friends. So we believe like when a relationship ends, or when a relationship breaks up, it's far less likely to have a huge emotional impact, and it'll be less likely to like bring down someone's entire world. Thirdly, just on the quantity, we believe like you do a whole lot of things together, so it matters more. You do a whole lot of date nights, you do a whole lot of debates together, you have a whole more times going out on the weekend. We also believe on the other side, if the relationship is bad, if a relationship is abusive, and every night you go home to someone that gaslights you and treats you poorly, we believe that accumulates over time to be a really bad thing and something that that matters and is like valuable to consider and care about in this debate. We believe that's something that you should weigh quite highly, so the harm just simply accumulates. Fourthly, just on this intensity point, we believe most breakups are amicable. This is responding to their material about the significant changes that you get. Why are breakups more amicable? A, we just believe like inherently a lot of breakups or like relationships ending are like due to geography or due to time. We believe like you just lose contact with someone when they go overseas, or you're just unable to talk to them, so they fade away over time. B, it's often like, it might be due to like, particularly in a family, due to death, when like you're prepared for this, you know that someone will die eventually, you're prepared for that, you can prepare in your mind that something is going to happen, you know this is universal. C, we believe like an unpleasant breakup is bad for both people and for both groups, so we believe both groups are incentivized to try and minimize the harm of that breakup, or minimize like how impactful that breakup is, so both groups try to make it less harmful. And then just D, so a lot of people, if you are doing a breakup, you have time to plan a breakup, you have time to like think about how you can let someone down slowly, so you don't actually like cause this big kerfuffle and like someone actually like, and you like absolutely ruin your friendship and like this person ends up stalking you. So we just believe at the end of the relationship, the majority of these relationships end amicably, so we don't see a lot of the harms that we get under their side of the house. Compared to under our side of the house, where there is this constant upkeep and a constant engagement, you cannot distract yourself, particularly if something is going badly, so you should care about this a whole lot more. The outcomes of this is that like it's far more meaningful memories. Like if something is going good, you can reflect on the good times, you can reflect on the memories. You have something in the store now that when you think about all these things that have happened, the benefit that has accumulated to you over time, even if you're not looking back on it, just empirically matters more, because there's more impactful, because there's greater connection, you get deep and true connection that you should care about a whole lot more, as it's like required by humans, required by humans, and the scale is a whole lot more impactful over time. This accumulates. This is the way in which we win this debate.
And whenever the second offenders start, yeah, welcome them up.
If you are deeply emotionally connected to someone and rely on them for a vulnerable connection, when you are used to this, you will be exceptionally devastated, exceptionally harmed when it ends. And I think this is very, very important. I think you should weigh this really, really highly on the effect that it lasts on you for the rest of your life. Because despite you may have had 3 great years with them, for the rest of your life, you now live with terrible, for the rest of your life, you now live with the understanding of why it ended, but also the education on how you, as a person, know how to find better friends. I think 3 things to do in my speech. Firstly, on framing. Secondly, on bad relationships. And firstly on bad relationships, and secondly on Firstly, on good relationships, and secondly, on bad relationships. Firstly, on framing. So how do these personal relationships look like? And we've got a wide range of relationships, short and long. But I think for the majority here, I think it is fair to claim that most relationships don't last the majority of your life. Sure, we can have we can talk about family relationships. We can talk about huge, long relationships that span for your entire life. But these are like 3 people in your life you end up meeting and greeting and interacting with and having relationships with many more people throughout your entire life, whether that be through stages of your life, through schooling, maybe that be through career. But all of these, at the end of this debate, we do not care about these these really long-lasting relationships, because it is unlikely that they will end, and therefore they don't, the ending doesn't even occur. But also because of the fact that you are more likely to be affected by the hundreds of others that do end up ending. And I think we have to examine how these personal relationships ends. And there are usually a moment in time when you and the other person end up splitting off from each other, heading in different directions. And maybe, yes, that means you grow apart, but also it likely means that because you've spent so much time together, because of these split in direction, you likely have different ideals, you likely have different goals, and you likely conflict in those ideas. And that is why I think we do see negative endings. And look, I think either way, if you believe these relationships end badly or amicably, I think I can prove to you why in this debate, and I'll prove to you soon why both of these outcomes work on our side of the house better. Okay, and then secondly, what does this ultimately mean? What does this framing ultimately mean for the debate? I think you have to consider that ending these relationships are important, and you can't just glaze and ignore them and think about the great benefits that you accumulated in life because of the fact that, because of the fact that they tell you something about what you and the person ultimately ended up splitting off with. That final reason, that baseline reason, usually helps educate you, usually has a lot of beneficial outcomes to learning and being able to take into your mind than just, I had a great years with them, therefore I can just glaze the end over. Okay, firstly then, on good friendships ending. And we hear this whole claim that, you're still going to have great friendships ending, you're going to have a majority of relationships are likely to end amicably. But I think I can flip this to prove to you why it's so good, even if you buy the material that amicable friendships are ending. Because of the fact that your ending doesn't taint the experience you already had. I think you are likely to concede, yes, I had great years with them, but I think being able to consider and take note of how they ended helps you have good closure to that relationship, right? You feel more complete, you had a good run, but I'm happy with how it ended. And I think that is ultimately what's most important for you to take going on forward in your life. I think you learn to be more mature and have more wisdom when you have to pick more relationships, when you have to choose who you're going to be friends with in the future, because you have better knowledge on how things ended, and so you know what could potentially arise, you know what sort of things could end a relationship, what things could potentially put strain on your relationship, meaning you are wiser in choosing better relationships in the future. And I think secondly here, on amicable friendships ending, I think if you had great friends, if you had great experiences, I think the fact that you've put a lot of trust in them and you put all of it, you were very emotionally connected, I think ultimately, I think that means you're more likely to look for such people in the future. I think you aren't likely to disregard this, and you are going to have more mature endings. And I think this whips Alex's content on being able to make better career connections in the future, because I think this point alone is really, really beneficial because of the fact that you have that wisdom. You also have that ability to reach out to them because of the fact of how it ended, and you are more likely to be less afraid to reach out because you have more care in how things end ended maturely because of the fact that, look, let's say you drift apart, you are more likely to remember that, you are more likely to remember the drift apart, the good ending that you had, and you are more likely to reach out to them in the future, maybe to restart that connection if situations change. Before I move on, I will take that POI.
Surely, if you characterize these relationships, you're constantly moving on to new ones, and they're actually not that important. The impact of losing that relationship is far less impactful and important.
I think the impact of losing that relationship is very important because of the points that I addressed to you on why you become more mature, but why you receive that closure, and that closure can be really emotionally beneficial for you, but also it's practically beneficial for you because of that maturity and because of the fact that you feel like you have more closure. And secondly, then on my clash around bad endings and having those negative sort of situations. I think two things here. I think the points that Alex gave you around being able to recognize that you have been robbed of a potentially even better relationship, the fact that all of these experiences have been ruined by something really harmful that they did to you, means that you are more likely to take note of this, and you are more likely to seek reprimand, or you are more likely to have more wisdom going into the future, because it means that maybe you got taken advantage of, you break up with your girlfriend. If you think about all the great experiences that you had with that person, you are more likely to go back to them. You are more likely to repeat that cycle of negative harm. You are more likely to get yourself into bad situations with similar individuals who might treat you in the same way. But if you take note of that harm, if you take note of how dangerous that can be for you, you are less likely to get into those relationships. And I think secondly here, I think this leads into the substantive contribution for my substantive contribution, my extension for this debate. I think bad relationships, especially the traumatic, the abusive, and the really dangerous relationships that individuals go through, cannot be solved if you look at the experiences part. Because these experiences often look like, you being abused by your father for years growing up, or you being taken advantage of for years by a romantic partner, or being bullied for years by people that you thought were his friends. I think if you do not focus on the end, which is likely that liberation, likely you being able to finish and say no to the ending of that relationship, if you do not manage to focus on that liberation, one, you cannot seek that retribution, you cannot seek the justice for the individuals that harmed you, but two, you just keep reliving that trauma, because instead of you focusing on the ending, you are focusing on what you lived through, and that is really, really harmful for the individuals, because you never managed to get over those negative generation, those traumatic experiences. And I think you are more likely to assume these experiences is how you should treat others. You are more likely to abuse your kids later in life because that is what you went through, that is what you sort of relive as what you think a parent should be. And I think this outcome alone is debate winning, because of the fact that it is impossible to stop this cycle without being able to focus on how you stop these cycles alone, on how you end these relationships, on how you seek that retribution. So what do we look at the end of this debate? I think either way, whether we buy that you have amicable relationships or not, the lessons that you learn, the maturity that you get from ending these relationships means you can find better ones in the future, means you can receive more, yes, sure, we can buy that, you are going to have benefits accumulated over time. I think you still note that. I think as a person, you still believe that you had those great experiences, but I think at the end of the day, instead of you trying to never go to, instead of you always thinking of reliving the past, you are looking forward to the future to find better friends. Thank you very much.
Please don't leave in the middle of the speeches, if can be avoided. I don't know if there's an emergency or not, but it seems there wasn't. Right, over to you.
Whenever the second negative speaker is ready, I offer the mic.
Three points to do for you in my speech today. And what I'll be focusing on is divorcing, pardon my language, the emotional and confused ideas we get from the affirmative team, from the reality of the motion and the reality of how this would actually play out. Now, let's get on to my first idea that I'm going to address. Will relationships mostly end amicably? We hear a big push from us right at first that explains through several mechanisms why relationships will end amicably. People have an interest in ending relationships amicably because it is bad for both parties when they have a big, messy fight and both parties go away feeling sad, and necessarily, usually, most cases in relationships, you know you're going to end it beforehand, so you have time to plan it out. You know your friend, so you know how to make the relationship end properly. So just simply, when you have majority reasonable people, which most of the population is to a limited extent, they are able to try and make an amicable relationship end well, and so we are likely that most relationships will end amicably. What do they tell us here? They mostly just give you a bunch of examples of really, really bad breakups. I would like to, one, just point out that the motion is about most personal relationships. It's not about all. It's not about those exceptional examples that stand out. So when they tell you that there's so many relationships that you go through in your life, that you meet a new friend every 5 or 1 year, that you're constantly forming new connections, they tell you that there is an insanely large scale of relationships, and obviously they don't all end in horrible breakups. As we told you, the majority of them just fade away, or like they move away and you stop talking to them, or you run out of time. Therefore, all of their material, when they give you these really bad examples, is contingent on them proving that the majority, that most personal relationships end with this horrific, highly impactful ending. But I would also just like to say that even if they do, the relationship itself will still have more of an effect on you. And I'm going to get onto that in my devastation point. So they tell you that when it's ended, you are devastated, right? They tell you that because relationships always end badly, note again, this material is all contingent, but fine, when it ends, you're so devastated, this has such an impact on you that it matters more to you than the relationship. Why is this not the case? One, because I'm going to flip some of their own material. They tell you that most relationships end, right? And people know that. They experience that regularly. So they are prepared for that. In their friendships, they are prepared for the possibility that these people will move away. In their family members, they are prepared that they might go off somewhere else in the world to explore their career. People are ready for this outcome, and so they are much less devastated than they would like you to imagine, because they have time to get ready, which is really the most important thing you need to emotionally regulate yourself. They also just say that there's lots of friendships. Okay, so you have constant new relationships to distract you from the end of the last one. I think the timescale weighing they give you is just not true, because I'm not still thinking about the people who stopped being friends with me in kindergarten, because I meet new people every day. I make new friends every day. And so my brain, which is a short-termist brain, which is interested in me now, like every other human's brain, and which has a bad and flawed memory, is just constantly trying to focus on the new connections it's making. And so I just don't care that much that I had a bad friendship breakup in year 7, because I've moved on with my life. So they have to prove to you then that people don't move on for an insanely large period of time over which they are constantly thinking about these relationships, even while they form new ones. I just think that that's not how it works. I also just want to tell you that thinking about things is a spectrum. It's not about whether you believe something went badly or believe something went well. You can contain in your memory of the relationship, oh yeah, it ended badly, but we had all those good times. You can have what's called a bittersweet memory. I don't know if that's common parlance, but so when you have this spectrum, they then need to prove to you that all of your memories are going to be right at the extreme end of the spectrum, that you can't think back on this relationship in a positive light. Because if you can, we definitely win. Why? Because the breakup is one memory. It happened one time, or like 3 times if you really didn't learn your lesson, right? Whereas, when you're in the relationship, you have a really extended period of memories. You remember that time you went to the aquarium. You remember that kiss on the bridge in Venice. You remember every date night because it was a positive experience. And so you'll just have such this volume of good memories compared to the one bad memory. So when you look back, yes, occasionally you'll feel sad, but the majority of your reminiscences will be necessarily good, unless you are in a bad relationship. Now let's get on to the idea of bad relationships. So I'd like to flag, I'm now moving on from this point of devastation because I've devastated it. Now, on this idea of how relationships work and why, they tell you that if you have a really, really good toxic relationship and you're going to want to go back if you focus more on how it went and how it ended. Note, this is not about how individuals focus. This is about what actually empirically matters more to you as an individual. I think if you're pulled back into the relationship because of how it went when you were in it rather than the ending, then it empirically must matter more to you how the relationship went than how it ended. So any evidence they give you that people are pulled back into relationships because they matter more goes for our side of the house. Yes, that can be a bad thing, but we're just talking about whether or not it is true that it matters more. When it has such an effect on you that it pulls you back into a bad relationship when you think about the times that you had, then it has an extreme effect on you. It matters extremely to you. Before I move on, I will take your POI.
If you have such a deep connection with someone, like often kissing on the bridge in Venice, and become reliant on it for satisfaction, wouldn't you be absolutely devastated if this were to end?
Okay, first of all, as we've already told you, you're not kissing the majority of your friends on a bridge in Venice. You know that you're eventually going to break up with your friends, so that's just an extremely small proportion of the relationship. I think at the point at which the motion just says most personal relationships, again, as I've said, you have to prove that you'll be this devastated, this emotionally reliant for most relationships. We think that, again, it's a spectrum. There's a small amount of investment. There is some investment in your friends and their emotional things, but it's not enough to continually devastate you when you're constantly making new connections, as we tell you. They need to prove that it is. Also, if we just go back to this idea, I think I've dealt with the idea of like you'll be forced back into abusive relationships, but I would just like to point out with this idea that it is fairly obvious that it matters more to you if you spend a large amount of time in a toxic relationship that ends well, that relationship was toxic and that it was bad for you. I think that's just something that has more of a lasting impact on a person, on their psyche, even if it ends well. Now, finally, onto my substantive contribution really quickly on skills, okay? You'll just build better skills and more impactful skills while you're in the relationship. Why? Because ending a relationship, as they've told you, maturity, blah, 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 only teaches you how to end relationships. But just because each relationship lasts 5 to 10 years, and because you have a relationship with everyone in your office and you need to empathize with like everyone you know, the skills you build while you're in a relationship, where you constantly learn to adapt to the different challenges in maintaining a relationship. You learn to self-reflect. They give you feedback on how you are as a friend, and you are able to be open and honest with this person. They communicate with you and teach you to communicate. These skills are actually really important for maintaining relationships in the workplace. I think it's actually better for you to be able to maintain lots of relationships than to be really good at ending them, because then you'll just have no friends.
Whatever third affirmative is ready, I'll
If relationships ending amicably is so desirable for Neg, we ought to put emphasis on how they end. However, I simply don't think this is true. Olivia Rodrigo wrote The Grudge for a reason. Firstly, on breakups, secondly, on personal effects, but before I get into that, some framing, because I think it's gone lost along the way, and I really want to clear this up first. Firstly, on timing. Firstly, I think it's inevitable that relationships end. This has been established pretty early. It happens constantly as well. I don't think there's one massive relationship that ends in your life. I think you have different types of relationships ending, and I think this can happen very often. Secondly, let's think about how long a relationship typically lasts. This could be 1, 5, 10, or even 20 years if you want to buy like a long-term relationship. No matter what type of relationship or how long it lasts, the majority of your life will be spent outside that relationship after it ends. This answers Neg's question earlier on about the debate, where does the value lie, during or after? I think this answers as after, because the majority of the scale of impacts happens after in the rest of your life. Secondly, on the nature of relationships. Firstly, we tell you that there's a wide variety of relationships and endings. These can be amicable splits, messy breakups, or simply like friends losing touch. Secondly, relationships are an integral part of who you are. So when they end, that has large effects because this like has emotional devastation on you. And I'm going to go into some introspective stuff that we brought out earlier on about how this tarnishes anything that may have happened during the relationship. Thirdly, on the ending. Firstly, I think we've already established that the ending will happen, so then it's not matters that it ends, it's how it ends. This is either amicable or messy. I think on both, like on our side of the house, we can claim both the benefits that happen when it's amicable and like all the devastating harms that happen when it's messy. So what does this framing mean for the debate? Firstly, it means that scale-wise, most of this debate takes place after the end, and this is where the most impact and weight is. Neg's case then happens on a much smaller scale, giving them a higher burden to like have to win on. Secondly, because of the nature of relationships, the emotional and tangible impacts are large. Note here that most of the tangible impacts that we brought out have gone largely unresponded to. So our content weighs highly, and even if you only buy some of it, because of the like massive scale of it, even if like only some of it is bought, it still weighs against like the really small scale impacts that Neg has on their side of the house. And then thirdly, the types of endings means that we can claim both harms and benefits on our, like harms to individuals and benefits on our side of the house. Alright, so firstly on breakups, how they end and why this matters. Neg tells you that most breakups are amicable. They tell you this is either because of like time, because of distance, or because of like the shared incentives, because people understand that they're going to have breakups in their lives, therefore they want them to be like as nice as possible. Firstly, I think this is simply not true. Look at high school relationships. I think when you're in a relationship, you're like emotionally charged, so these shared incentives don't really like take over because you don't really think rationally because you're thinking really emotionally. Note here that like if Neg values emotion so much, they also have to understand that emotion means that people are like really charged and therefore like can't think rationally and like have amicable breakups. And then like secondly, I think the reason for most breakups, particularly in like high school context, but I think outside of this as well, is because something happens, like for example, one person betrays the other, or because like they no longer have like shared values, or like something like scandalous happens. When you have something scandalous happen in a relationship, I doubt you're going to have an amicable breakup. I think this is the majority of breakups, therefore the majority of breakups aren't amicable and you can't buy Neg's material here. Secondly, they told you that the bar for devastating marital or parental relationships to break down is high. Firstly, I think the evidence and reality proves that this isn't true, sadly. I think lots of like marital breakups break down. I think you can look at this in like countries such as the US, like the majority of relationships end in like a divorce, and some people have like multiple marital relationships. I don't think you can say that it's extremely high to happen. It happens in celebrities, it happens in regular people. I think this was really assertive and not really backed up. Secondly, even if it is incredibly high, if you want to buy that, which I don't think you should, when it happens, the harms are huge and extremely long-lasting. This ties back to all the scale material that we gave you earlier on. Even if it's like a high bar to be reached, the moment that it is reached, the harms are absolutely devastating and last for the rest of that individual's life. I think you have to buy that if you care as much as Neg does about the emotional impacts of this person. And thirdly, like the ending matters here. Either the ending for a person in like a bad relationship is like devastation, like I just told you can happen if it breaks up in like a really bad manner, and therefore like you're thinking about everything that happened in a really bad way, or like you're really badly personally affected because it affects your other relationships, it affects your career. We gave you all of this at Alex, some really strong substantive material here about like tangible effects. Or it ends in liberation. If you have like a really bad relationship, like for example an abusive relationship, and the ending is like positive for you, like note here, this is the ending, this is how it ends, it's really positive for you because you can claim like benefits later in your life because you're no longer attached to this relationship. You can go out and like try and undo all the harms that happened that accumulated while you were in that relationship. At the end of like the breakup point, I think we've proven that like breakups don't happen in the way that Neg tells you they want that they do, partly because of like the emotional like nature of human beings, and then partly because when you look at like real life, it simply does not look like that. Alright, secondly, on personal effects. They tell you that cumulative harms, like abuse, and benefits as well during matter more than breakup ones. Firstly, we tell you retrospection largely takes out all your emotional substantive, because I think after a breakup happens, like everything that happens during it is largely tainted, because when you look back on it, like you're questioning everything that happened, particularly if it's a really messy breakup and like something scandalous happens. For example, if somebody cheats on you, then like when you look back at everything that happened during the relationship, you're like, did they really love me, or like did they love the other person? I think that's That's a really big harm here, and this is like crucially where the ending of it matters more than anything that happened during it, and where the retrospection can take out any of the benefits that they want to claim. Secondly, you haven't responded to any of our substantive material on tangible harms, which often undo any cumulative benefits on their side of the house as well. Any tangible benefits that you want to claim during a relationship, for example, like having a really nice house or like having a lot of money because the other person has like a really good career, that's instantly undone when you have a really messy breakup and they don't want to give you any of your money, or like they don't want to let you have rights to your kids, or they want like all their house and money back. Like, I think that's instantly undone and you haven't responded to any of that stuff. Secondly, they claim that like people move on, so emotion doesn't last. Like, you're not going to care that you broke up with your girlfriend two years later. Firstly, we tell you that grudges literally disprove this. Some people can get really salty and care about it for a long amount of time. I imagine if you get cheated on, you're not going to move on from it in like the matter of a year. And it's going to be like really devastating for you, especially like damaging your future relationships, because you now have like trust issues, and therefore like that's really bad for other relationships that you have. That means that you get into a cycle where you have really bad breakups and really bad endings. Secondly, even if you buy that people move on, because you have multiple relationships in your life, even if you move on, the moment you get into your next one and then you have a really bad ending in that one, then that destroys you as well. I think this continues to keep happening. I don't think it's one thing that happens one-off in your life and that you move on from it really easily. I think it lasts. Thirdly, I think human nature dictates that negatives usually outweigh the positives, which is like really sad but also really true. I think that if something really bad happens to you, you're more likely to like not move on from that than you are to like care about the things that happened positively during a relationship. I don't think you can claim that you'll still care about all the good things that happened if you're not going to care about all the bad things that happened. I don't think you're just going to let go of the negatives. So at the end of that point of clash, I think we take that the personal effects are really bad on their side of the house, and that we dismiss any of the cumulative stuff that they want to claim by any of the stuff that actually happens as a result of a messy breakup, or even like an amicable breakup as well. So how do we win this debate? I think that even if we take both teams at their best in this debate, we still win because of scale. I think the time after the relationship is longer, therefore anything that happens after the breakup matters intuitively far more than anything that happens during the relationship. I think even if you don't want to buy this, we've still taken out most of the material on like cumulative stuff with all of our points at the end of this debate. Proud to affirm.
So then I welcome up the third negative summary.
One thing I want to flag to you before the crux of my speech is that F spends a lot of time telling us why it's really harmful to be in a bad relationship. However, they miss the point that our entire case is that you should probably focus on the inside of the relationship rather than just the breakup. That is to say, when they tell you why a breakup is bad, on our side, we probably just don't focus on the breakup. We focus on the relationship. That's probably a good thing. All right, so I'm going to split this speech up into two things. Firstly is on the tangible outcomes, the tangibility content, and then secondly is on the emotional content, which I think is probably the crux of our case. So, firstly on tangibility, they say that you tarnish your connection and relationship with others if a relationship ends badly. I think there are a few responses to this. I think the first one is that in the immediate sense, when you are in a bad relationship which you don't enjoy, oftentimes that is when you become closest to your friends and family. You turn to them for emotional support. You talk things through with them. I think oftentimes people grow closer when they're in the midst of a bad friendship or bad relationships because you just ask for advice, you come together. But I think secondly, under tarnishing the connection with other people, note that on our side, you uniquely place an emphasis on the quality of the relationship and the stuff that is going on. That is to say, when you look at the relationship and just assess its merits, you probably look back and you're like, well, actually, look at how my partner was stopping me from going to see my friends and family, if that did happen, which I don't necessarily think it does, you probably reflect on that and you say, to the extent that that can never happen again because you notice your mistakes and you can't do it again, you're likely to just reconnect at the end of your relationship. Versus, I think, on the comparative, if you focus on the breakup, you probably just obsess over it. I think you probably never see how the relationship was harmful. You probably never see that, the relationship itself was harmful for those, if it was. I think, secondly, on tangibility is the costs to, I think, your career or like the tangible stuff which they kind of told you at first. I think, firstly, note that they say that these relationships are only for a period of 5 years. I think in that kind of culture, you probably are never reliant on other people in a tangible sense. You're probably never with them for long enough to, I guess, get any tangible gains. But I think, secondly, is, look, we've told you, you still probably have a lot of friends on our side. It's unclear to me why those kind of tangible material benefits is exclusive to their side. Now, lastly, on tangibility about learning. They say that you learn a lot from the breakup and that is a valuable thing. I think that, when you break up, it probably isn't surprising. You can still probably look at the actual content or material of the breakup itself. Of the relationship itself. I think that it's likely to be far more valuable to your learning because oftentimes these breakups are emotionally charged. I think it's very hard to look at it, to look at the learning from it with a objective lens. I think you probably get distracted versus when you look at the relationship, you can probably find areas where it may have worked, it may not have worked. I think it's likely to be far more positive. Yeah, go ahead.
If everyone prepared for the end of relationships, can you explain to me why the messy breakups still exist in society today?
I don't think everyone does. But I will respond to that later. I think that kind of falls more under the emotional category. Okay, now into the emotional category. And I think that this is probably what we've really pushed to you throughout our case. I think firstly is that they tell you that people, I guess, are pulled back into harmful relationships or that there's some kind of recurring, ongoing harm. I think the thing to explain here is that the way the breakup looks is actually incredibly nebulous and is never really interconnected to the actual crux of the performance of the relationships. I have 3 reasons why. Firstly is because breakups are often influenced by personal challenges in your own life, things that you are going through which are not directly connected to the quality of the relationship. I think that secondly is because oftentimes the breakup happens out of complete surprise. Oftentimes people simply aren't expecting it. And I think that thirdly on why breakups are entirely nebulous is because oftentimes when you are really connected with someone or you think the vibe of the relationship is quite positive, you probably just don't expect you don't really expect a breakup to be happening. I think you're probably quite surprised. I think that what this means is that when they push content to you about being able to learn emotionally from a breakup, it's probably just never very helpful because maybe you can look back on it and say, well, that breakup made me feel bad, I'd never get into it again. But I think the crux of the issue here is that that breakup was never actually tied to the quality of the relationship. You can probably have really harmful, abusive relationships which have great breakups because there was never any emotional connection there. You can probably have really great relationships which have really terrible breakups because it just came as a complete surprise. I think that it's far more likely you fall into that emotional trap of going back to abusive partners if you solely focus on the breakup because it is not an accurate measure of how the relationship kind of actually worked. But I think that secondly on the kind of emotional aspect of that relationship, the lessons you learn from a breakup emotionally in terms of how you handle future relationships are never as valuable because your perception of the breakup is always skewed. There is the type of breakup which I'm talking about under this point is those really conflicted breakups where there's one side which believes one thing, one side which believes another thing. Obviously there is a lot of, I think, disagreement within those within those breakups. You probably just get a skewed emotional learning or a skewed emotional understanding. I think that isn't really great. So they tell you under emotional that it leaves you emotionally scuffed a breakup. But I think we tell you down the line that this that is literally the comparative of this debate. Because our side, we're pushing to you that you probably focus on your current relationships or how the actual, duringness of the relationship looked like. Whereas on their side, you continue to look back on the breakup. How did it work? I think that it's probably far better to focus on the way it happened during the current relationship. Okay, but I think lastly, and this is just kind of whipping material, is that there's a huge category of friends in this debate which was never entirely touched on, right? We told you about this down the line, but a good bulk or majority of the relationships in this debate are just friendships. And when you break up from a friendship, it's like 9 times out of 10, it's just for like really kind of nebulous reasons, like moving away. It's never really a huge disagreement. And I think in those cases, which note is the vast majority of cases, because they tell you that you are not in a relationship for the, in a romantic relationship for the vast bulk of your life. I think in those friendship relationships, it's always better to look back on the actual constructive part, because on both sides, you probably always have conflict in your romantic relationships. But I think the difference is when you look back on those friendships, it gives you a unique sense of catharsis, which is incredibly valuable because you feel that sense of safety, even if it is only for a small amount of period. That is still incredibly beneficial. Proud to negate.
And as customary, I will now request the speaking order and welcome up the member.
Thank you, Michael. Three things to do for me, to do for you and my leaders. Firstly, a point about framing and how the ways in which you can view this debate. We believe we win on both of those ways, regardless of which one you choose. And then onto the 2 points of class we've seen. One, the emotional impacts, and then secondly, the tangibility. So firstly, on this point about framing, I think we see 2 conflicting framings of the way you should view this debate. We tell you at first and at Michael that a way you should view this debate is almost like an objective after the fact, looking at like objectively what is the best thing that you should focus on in terms of this relationship. We hear from the affirmative side of this house a different way in which you should frame this debate, one in which like the scale that happens after, and you should care about that a whole lot more. We believe under our side of the house, again, note what I gave to you at first about the way you should view this debate, about what changes in this debate. What the changes in this debate is what you focus on more when you evaluate this relationship. What happens is what you should focus on what has changed and how you view this relationship. Again, we believe we can win on both the framing of this debate and also our framing of this debate. So on to emotional impacts. We give you a lot of stuff at first about how during a relationship, you're far more likely to feel greater emotional impacts. Why? Because of the time scale, because of the vulnerability, and because of the quantity of the time as well that you experience here, and also this intensity as well that you get because of these breakups are because of the amount of maintenance you have to do for these relationships. We hear in response to this, and also a lot of the AF team case, is that these breakups are going to taint any good memories you have, and that you should care far more about these things because they're far longer lasting. What do we give you in response to this? I think firstly we tell you implicitly that a lot of these relationships are amicable. We give you 4 mechs for this. We give you plenty of mechs as well down the line because of the geographic reasons, because you just ran out of time, because you can prepare for these things, because you have an incentive to make your breakup amicable, because you have time to prepare for your breakup to be amicable. What does it mean at the end of that? We believe you should just buy the fact. And the only thing we get in response to this, by the way, is firstly an example bashing for high school kids have pretty bad breakups because they're probably not as mature as you would expect. But also secondly, we get via POI at third neg about how it's messy relationships still exist. Why do they still exist? Because they're an exception, because they exist, but they're an exception. That's why Olivia Rodrigo made her song about these, because they're so unique, because they are an exception. So what do you mean? What does that leave you at the end of this? It means that you should buy the fact that most of these relationships end well, they end amicably, and they end amicably. What does it mean? It means that when you weigh this up, that they don't taint your memories of these things. They don't taint your memory of the relationship as it happened. You have all these good experiences and they are untainted. It means that in your assessment of these things and what has happened, it means it's largely good, but also you should value the good things that happened during your relationship more than the amicable relationship, because there's a greater time scale and because there's more intensity in those, and so you should value that more. Now, what happens though when we do have a bad relationship? Even if there is a bad relationship, note again, we tell you these things are rare, but we just believe the volume of the good memories outweigh these things. Even if your memories are tainted somewhat, you still remember how you felt when that person bought you flowers. You still remember how these things happened. You still remembered what it was like to be heard and to be seen by another person for the first time. That is the value that we get in this relationship. That is the value of these good memories. That is what we value so much more in this debate. We believe, just you look at these the two ways. Objectively, you can just do the math and the calculus in your head. If you are looking at this like objectively, that you just like accumulate more benefit and more utiles when you have these things. If you look at it on their side of the house about the scale that happens after, it looks that just like you just feel a whole lot better about yourself because again you have these memories and we gave you these reasons why, and we just value this so much more than the tangibility, because it's again these things like you can buy your own house, you can probably like have a successful career as well, but like even if just very quickly on tangibility, like it's entirely like about how you become dependent on them. We tell you again a lot of your relationships with friends and family. Brent tells you about how you get support. We tell you how you develop skills as well, and like we also like just the contradiction here. If your relationships are only lasting for 5 years, you're probably not becoming that dependent on them. We just believe ultimately though that doesn't matter. The emotional impacts matter far more. That is why I'm proud to be
Awesome. And to close off our debate today, I'd like to invite up the affirmative place.
If celebrities who write breakup songs are the exception as to why they feel hurt and devastated after having terrible breakups in relationships, why is it that millions of people around the world relate to them so much and also listen to this music? I think this analysis alone sort of proves to you why bad relationships happen, but also I will explain in this reply on why, even if you believe good relationships can occur or good endings can happen, why the endings still matter more to you after the fact that these relationships have ended. So 3 things to do in my reply. Firstly, on how these relationships ends, the clashes around good and bad relationships, the clashes around bad endings and bad experiences, and lastly, on the sort of practical outcomes point. So firstly, on how these relationships ends. And I think the point that we gave you that it is inevitable that the end means that outcomes and endings have the final blow. It means that the last thing you remember of a person is the ending, and therefore it holds the most weight to you as you think back on those relationships. That is the forefront of your mind. It is not the experiences that you had. It is the last thing that you did with them. And I think this means that over the course of your life, when you think about people, when you think about what matters most to you, you are outside of those relationships, meaning the memories around how the relationship ending is the first thing that you think about, is the thing that matters to you the most, because of the fact that the majority of our life is spent outside of those relationships. Therefore, and the scale that this impacts the debate is it means that generally our points are like the way people think about relationships will ultimately matter more to them rather than before they just go straight to thinking about experiences. Let's move on to good relationships, good experiences. So we hear this whole claim from Neg around, how all relationships always end good, there's lots of reasons, etc., etc. But I think we told you that people go separate ways because of the conflicting goals that they have there. And I think this as well is the fact that there is a sadness of you ending the relationship impacts you more than just any good. Because usually for humans, as we tell you, it is disappointing news, it is sad news, it is hurtful news that often weighs on you the most, is often what plays to you the most. I think we can win on all of Af's whole points here though, because of the fact that you have that retrospective viewpoint, and therefore you go through the analysis of what went wrong, or also around the idea of I finally have emotional closure. This is what matters to me the most, because even if these relationships ends good, I think the fact that the most important thing for you is because of the fact that because these relationships are good, you ended them well, and I think that is what is most important to you. because you care so much about this person, you care so much about having a good relationship, therefore you care so much about making sure that your ending, the ending was good, was somber, was bittersweet. I think the impact around the sadness that you may have, but also the importance of ending that relationship well is what wins us this point. But secondly then, on bad endings and bad experiences. And I think this is where we win the debate. This is the pivotal point. Because bad experiences are the most remembered. They are the ones that you will remember, you will remember, you will weigh on for the rest of your life, because, there was that one person that you truly love. It doesn't really matter if you had a kiss in Venice, because of the fact that she stole your heart, she broke your heart and ran away with another man. That is what I will never forget. That is what I finally believe will weigh on my mind the most, because it doesn't matter if I had this one-off experience. It is the way I was finally treated at the end that taints my entire viewpoint on that person. It is, did they really love me? The question that is asked, not, oh, I enjoyed that one time that we went out. Okay. That is why we win that point in clash. I think finally then, on practical outcomes, what do we hear? We heard that learning and wisdom is really important. And we heard this whole sort of mitigation around emotionally charged. But I think it's unclear here why you don't care about these endings, because you want to make sure that in the future, when you get into these relationships, you don't have those past experiences, you aren't hurt, or maybe you don't end up going separate ways, because you want to try and spend more time with people. You want to make sure that the things that ended those previous relationships, you want to analyze those so you go into future relationships caring and making sure it can't happen again. That is why we win on those practical outcomes, and that is why we win this debate. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank all speakers for this debate. We're going to try and turn off the live stream now.
Yeah.
Shut up.
Thank you. Cross the floor, shake hands, and then just everyone stick up. Thank you.
Will it end immediately? We got 30 seconds.